I had a client ask me a really good question that I thought I would address and share here, which was how can I be more mindful in the everyday, in the moment, versus just when I'm doing yoga or when I'm sitting down for a 30-minute meditation session. And I think this is so important because, let's be honest, most of us don't feel like we have time to be mindful, and if it requires taking 30 minutes or more out of our day to do yoga or to do meditation, when in truth, we don't have to wait just once a day or once a week to be mindful. We can be mindful at any time. It is only about being present and being aware of what's happening in the moment, bringing your focus into the now, instead of where a lot of us like to live, which is future casting, worrying about the future, that anxiety, or playing back the past, which usually can come in a form of sadness or also worry. And so being more fully present is really valuable to avoid a lot of the uncomfortable feelings of the past and the future, because genuinely and most often in the very moment, there are no problems. We aren't feeling all of those things. The stress and worry comes from living in the past or thinking about the future. So getting into the moment is great and it's important, but it doesn't have to take all of your time. It isn't a big monumental task to be mindful, but it does take awareness and it takes intention. And so I wanted to offer 3 tools today for helping you with that, and then a 4th sort of bonus idea. So hopefully these will help you. And the first one is going to sound incredibly simple because it is, and it is breathing. But the truth is, you may be thinking, I breathe all the time, but actually, it's usually happening without your awareness, without any conscious awareness. We aren't intentionally breathing. It's happening automatically. We aren't thinking about creating the breath. We aren't paying attention to the breath. We're taking it for granted and allowing it to happen. So to be more mindful, when we feel ourselves feeling stressed, anxious, worried, upset, sad, anger, living in the future, living in the past, when we notice ourselves being pulled out of the present moment, to just think about the breath can be really powerful. To return to it, to bring intention to it, to think about breathing, and then to take a deep breath in and out, and to do it with intention. Just that act alone of taking a deep, intentional breath will usually help to alleviate whatever tension we were feeling, or at least begin to reduce it. It brings us back into the moment. So whenever you're starting to feel that pulling out of the moment, just remind yourself to come back to the breath. This tool always works for anyone, to come back to the breath and take that deep intentional breath, or 2 or 3, or as many as it takes to be back into the fully present moment. Very often, though, it only takes 1 or 2 to help kind of ease whatever was happening and to bring you back into the moment. Another tool, which is also very simple but maybe not quite as obvious, is to use our 5 senses. So to think about sight, sound, what we smell, taste, and feel. To go to those 5 senses and to think about what's happening in this very moment with each of those senses. So again, when you're feeling yourself being pulled out of the current moment, feeling all of those other feelings and want to get back into the present, to be mindful and aware, bring your thought to your senses and do a quick scan. Sometimes breathing doesn't feel like it's cutting it, or we're too anxious to even breathe to really make that work for us. So sometimes this tool can be more useful. It's an exercise. It gives our brain somewhere to go instead of in the future or the past. And so you ask your brain, what do I smell right now? And just allow it. Just, what are the things I smell at the moment? The lunch I just cooked, the fireplace, whatever it is you're smelling. Run through all of the smells until you can't smell anything else. And then move into sight. What do I see? Look around. What are all the things you can see? Catalog them, pay attention to them, bring awareness and be mindful of what they are. Really notice them. And do the same for what you hear, what you taste, what you feel. And this can be something that can be as simple as a few seconds on each one. So you could do this in 30 seconds, 25 seconds. Or you can stretch that out and really savor each one and make it into a 5-minute or longer kind of meditative, contemplative practice that isn't a 30-minute sitting with your legs crossed and saying Om kind of meditation if you don't feel like you have the time, or if the inclination for that. For some people that doesn't work. It actually becomes too stressful and difficult, especially if you don't have a lot of practice of being mindful. So doing the 5 senses can be really helpful when that may not be something you want to do, or you have less time. So when you're feeling those feelings of being out of the moment, another tool that you can kind of pull from is if breath work isn't cutting it or it just doesn't feel right, the five senses, and catalog them, run through those senses and do it like an exercise. And the last one I want to share is what I call the three questions. I think these are three really powerful questions for helping you get back into the present moment, especially when you feel your thoughts spiraling either into the future or into the past and feeling anxious about that. It can help you regain some sense of control in those moments. And so those questions are, what am I thinking? So just starting with what's going on here. What are the thoughts that I'm having in this moment? Instead of kind of just allowing the anxiety and the anxious feelings to take over, really stop and get critical about what are the thoughts? What am I thinking in this moment? What is the worry? And then number two is, what am I making this mean? What's the story I'm telling myself? So this is the thought I'm having in this moment, but this is what I'm actually making it mean. This is what I'm telling myself it means, right? So maybe the worry is like, I'm worried that I'll never get this project done. And I just have these thoughts about like, I'll never finish this project. Okay, so what am I making that mean if I don't finish the project? Well, I'm making that mean that I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm not lovable. I'll get fired. I'm making this mean that, no one will ever talk to me again, right? What am I making this mean? What is this saying about me? That can help you start to go from believing whatever the thought is, which is like, you'll never finish this project or something, to actually understanding what you're making that mean. So the deeper level of what that thought is, which is the thought isn't stressful because of the project itself, but it's because I'm making it mean that I'll get fired or no one will love me. That's something very different. So from there, once we understand what's real, which is just I have a deadline, versus what am I making it mean? If I don't meet the deadline, I'll get fired or I'm not lovable. Then we can go into the third question, which is what's my choice? Again, bringing it back to agency, to feeling like you have control and power over your situation, looking for the things over which you do have control. Maybe you can't change the deadline, but you can say, well, I'm going to do what I can, or I'm going to finish it in the time I can. I'm going to do it while doing some deep breathing so it feels less stressful. I'm going to ask for an extension. Or maybe it's something else where you have no control, like worry about what's going on in the world. But part of that is what's my choice, is figuring out what can I control here, which may only be how I feel and respond to it, how I care for myself in this moment. But going through those three questions can really help you with getting back to a place of just being in the moment and thinking about what can I do right now in this moment? What do I have control over? What do I have power to do? And that's just another way of being present. So those are the three tools, and then I'll bring you the fourth little bonus thing I was going to talk about, which is creating a habit around those tools, or in general, which can be helpful for mindfulness, because we can create a habit that tells us every time I pick up this phone, I'm going to do something more mindful. I'm going to be mindful in that moment. Because guess what? You pick up your phone a lot if you're like most people throughout the day. If you could create a habit that every time you pick it up, you take a deep breath before you open it, that can change how mindful you're being throughout the day. The same to be said if you could create a habit that every time you sit down or stand up or walk through a door or get into the car or lay your head down, that at any of these moments you create a mindful habit. That will add how many times you're being mindful throughout the day, even if that habit is just a deep breath, or if that habit is just a quick scan of the five senses, or even just a mantra in the moment that says presence, right? Creating those habits allows you to have more mindful doses throughout the day. So how do you create a habit? It's called trigger training, which is you identify a trigger. So I just said, pick up the phone. That's the trigger. When I pick up the phone, I'm going to create a habit. I do it intentionally at first. We have to be intentional to create the habit. At first, we have to do it with mindfulness, really think about it, be very intentional about creating it. And then eventually, some people say 21 days, that's arbitrary. But after a certain amount of time of repeating that intentional habit, it actually becomes unintentional. The brain starts to learn like, oh, when we pick up our phone, we take a deep breath. So at first you identify what is the trigger you want, whether it's picking up the phone, laying down your head, going for a walk, every time you put on your shoes, finding some trigger, and then thinking, what do I want to do in those moments? Do I want to take a deep breath? Do I want to say a mantra? What do I want to do in that moment? And then you begin about doing it intentionally. Every time you put on your shoes, you say the mantra. Every time you pick up your phone, you take a deep breath. And you be very intentional that every time you do that activity, for as long as it takes, you are intentionally doing it until you notice that you don't have to think so much before it starts to happen. And after time, I assure you, if you keep up with it, you will form a habit that every time you pick up the phone, you take a deep breath. So that's another way we can go about reinforcing our mindfulness and having it in small doses throughout the day. So breath work, scanning the five senses, asking ourselves the three questions: what am I thinking? What am I making this mean? And what is my choice? And then as a bonus, creating a habit, using trigger training to create a habit to add mindfulness throughout the day. I also mentioned mantras, which can be powerful and helpful as a piece of that tool or as a piece of this work. And then finally, I want to recommend one book that I think is really helpful when we think about mindfulness, which is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Reading that can really help reinforce for you about being mindful and being present. It's everything the book is about. And I think it's a really useful tool also to keep in your tool belt. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Make sure you subscribe and share it with anyone else for whom you think mindfulness might be a priority in this year.